It's the SDG Podcast. Before we get started, you can check us out on the web at solutiondesign.com/podcast or find us on all the social medias, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Solution Design Group. We're back for another podcast. We're recording, gentlemen. Thanks for joining us. We got Peter Lawrence with us.
Hi there.
And James Kirwin is back. Hey, James. And
James, this is an audio-only podcast as well, so you can't just wave.
I can just wave. You saw me do it.
This will be a gesture-only podcast. So we talked about data waste and kind of got into content and knowledge management and a lot of different stuff. And we kind of ended toward the theme of it's everybody's problem. Data waste is everybody's problem. Content is everybody's problem. Cleanup is everybody's problem.
James was unwilling to pick a sacrificial person to identify as the data waste problem manager.
Yeah. So we're going to focus on that piece. We're going to focus on involving the business so that we are solving our problem instead of the expectation just being on your IT person or your people or project team to do it.
Well, because the real question is how many people in IT care about what data we have collected and where it is? 4?
I don't have.
I mean, you're gonna have that one person who's either like your data architect or whatever, who has a strong business understanding as well. And in the concept of data governance, we call them the data admin, of course.
There we go.
But that person is a technology leader who has a strong sense of what the business needs. And generally, all of this does fall to them, but that's not a job for one person. Yeah, you can blame that person.
Just kidding.
But that's why we have 95% of the data just sitting out there. Because they are busy in other ways.
For sure.
So data waste in databases. And that could be, we have one team running their business out of a spreadsheet, and we have one team using an Access database running off a Windows 2003 server in the closet. And so there could be inefficiencies and problems with data storage that run across the organization. So there's that kind of stuff. There's data waste in applications. When it was database and was architected and designed, a lot of stuff was added because we might need this
number.
Might
need that someday. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's those types of cleanups. It's documents and, man, just the duplicates on my own laptop, And I'll tell you what, no one does this perfectly. The more people that have to use the same data, I think the more organized it has to be.
As long as they use the same data.
As long as they, versus pulling it from the same source and then keeping their copy.
Yeah, I'm just going to take this copy over here. I need to add a few extra fields that you don't want. And we'll just both keep them in sync permanently forever. And what could go wrong?
I mean, and I think every organization has somewhat of a nightmares, of all the nightmare scenarios there are, the data problem, everybody seems to have at least one of them. Like a intranet has all the changes, everything going through one person in the communications department. And that bottleneck will, everything gets backed up, waiting, things aren't happening in time. People are upset. And then when that happens, people are deviously creative and resourceful. And that's great, but it's also a problem. Names. So you'll have one group that has the old intranet in a .mht file. Another one that's created their own in OneNote or Microsoft Word or Excel. Whatever the tool at hand is that the person doing it, we need these things listed. We need access to these things. We need this organizational structure. I've encountered, because I've done a lot of these type, intranet projects and collaboration and migrations from file shares to SharePoint and things of that nature. So I've been heavy into the content side, and I've run start to finish processes of a messy file share to an organized, my document library or set of document libraries. I like this
with
topic.
Governance, right?
Governance is, yes, with governance.
Is why SharePoint exists and not just a bunch of file shares, right?
Right.
And it's interesting because of the way SharePoint is structured and all the features it has can be applied and enforce that governance.
Right.
Is it easy to use that way? Is it easy to maintain? Once I leave, what are they going to do with it?
And that's another reason you don't want it to be a single person. Just like in an application, you don't want that single point of failure.
No, for every group, department, every stakeholder that we could identify, and this kind of our overarching topic of involving the business, this was our first step, was identifying all the stakeholders, all the owners of the data, not by name, but by role, by title, by department. And you inherit what you inherit. So your department owns this and you've been tasked with it. I'm sorry, you've only been here a week and you have no idea what any of this stuff is or why we use it. But again, that's the business has to work through those things.
But you're talking about data stewardship there, right?
Yes.
That's exactly it.
Yeah. So that first step of involving the business, James, you talked about it, and your approach was basically the same as mine.
Right.
Which means it's perfect because two of us agree. So the first thing was I call them champions. Some people call them ninjas. They like to give them cute names of the stakeholders. What did you call them?
So in data governance, the term is data steward.
Okay.
Yeah, so the person who would be a business side, not a technology side person, is the steward. They are responsible for, kind of bridging that gap between business and IT. So it's a point of contact for your technology leaders.
Both sides to go through, right?
Yeah, exactly. That would be the person who can request changes to how the data is stored. And they're also responsible for helping set data definitions along with the data admin and asking for new things or giving permission to delete things. Mm-hmm. We like that one a lot.
That's a nice
empowerment.
Nice permission.
Yeah, because you can think of the data team as more like a shipping company. Like they own the boats, ETLs, they own the shipping containers, databases, but what's in those containers? They don't own that. They can't do anything about it.
If it falls off in the middle of the ocean, it's gone.
So the data stewards have to make the call on what's in those containers.
And they do that both ways, right? They talk to technical folks about what they want to keep and what they want to maintain. And they talk to their business folks like, hey, IT is telling me that this is unused. Is it really unused? Do we use it for that one annual report that nobody remembers right? And tracks that down.
The question I always hear the most when we start a data governance system is, hey, did you know we had this? And that's always the biggest problem, because it's not that it's there. It's not that it exists. It's that nobody knows it's there. So it's useless if the people who would use it don't know it's available.
Now, do you sometimes run into the problem where discovery brings new and greater projects and data?
It absolutely can. And that's the thing. You kind of have two sides to this, obviously, the business and technology. So you have your data stewards and your data users. And they don't always know what's available. The data steward would talk to the data admin, usually data architect, et cetera. And on the same side with the data admin is the data custodians. Those are your data engineers. They're actually responsible for setting the rules, setting the ETLs, the movement, pathways, pipelines, whatever you want to call them.
Just one more. We're going to probably go through this more than once. We've got data stewards, data admins, data custodians. Who am I missing?
Data users.
Data users. Okay.
Right.
So that's those are the players you're talking about, and
right.
They might be product owners or whatever. You don't care about that. They've been assigned this role.
Right, exactly. And so a data admin is someone who has a strong sense of the business as well as a strong sense of technology. Usually that's a data architect or whoever your data lead is.
That's the person who's straddling both worlds, right? They've got the tech world and the business world.
And there's usually going to be one person, and they kind of steer your data governance. Usually they're some kind of leadership position that can make decisions and has some power. And then you have your data steward role, which is multiple people, usually one per department, roughly.
Okay. That's fair.
So you have, marketing, sales, operations, client
IT,
success,
even, probably.
customer service. IT should have someone because they have internal data, and it shouldn't just be the leader. There should be someone else.
Right.
And in IT, you might have, your DevOps have certain logs, et cetera. They're going to have a steward. Your applications people, they should have a steward because they know that old dead code can probably go away.
Right.
Yeah.
So we're not just getting rid of the data. Sometimes we're getting rid of the code if you have code that uses dead data, there's really no point in having either of them around.
Right. Well, and even when you upgrade systems, I used to work for a company that switched from Cold Fusion to Java. Yeah, that is a jump. And the Cold Fusion code just sat around for like a whole year, the entire application base. Why are you keeping this? Why is it still on active servers? You have running servers with all of this application waste.
Just going to go look at that one thing one more time,
Right? And they had kept the whole application alive for like one data flow.
Oh.
Literally for one data flow. So they rewrote that and were able to shut the whole thing down. Nice. But it didn't happen until somebody asked.
Right. Because that data flow was working.
Yeah. If it's working, why bother? Well, because you have 3 licensed Windows servers costing you a fortune.
And you're doing the big support plan just in case.
Is this data flow worth this much money? Well, are you sure about that?
Yeah, and they were concerned about the cost of developers to rewrite that data system, but when you compare it to how much you were paying for licensing and keeping the bandwidth and flow of those servers, you're going to pay a little bit on dev in the short term and save a lot in the long term.
And of course, let's say it changes, right? Oh, look, the vendor has changed a field. Now somebody has to go learn Cold Fusion, make the change, never touch Cold Fusion ever again.
Right. And if that person doesn't quit because they had to learn Cold Fusion.
Whoa. Time out. Cold
you
Fusion
turn on
is
your
awesome.
tracking,
I
Peter.
love Cold Fusion. I cut my web teeth on Cold Fusion point something.
I also started as a Cold Fusion developer.
All right.
I'm allowed to badmouth it.
Okay, we'll back down a little bit.
Sites I sold when I was selling websites for Cold Fusion. So what you gonna do? So this sounds like there's an opportunity for a fresh set of eyes with that experience to look through that current state.
Right.
And identify those Cold Fusion things and, really kind of get in there and look at how everything's running and stored and, what is actually alive and what is just sitting there taking up space. Is there uniformity across the organization?
And that's
that kind of thing.
Why we usually start with identifying these roles, much like you, is being able to identify people we can talk to about every one of these sections of data, because data governance is at its core a collaborative decision-making thing.
Right, 2 ways, both ways.
Yeah.
Everybody's involved. The whole company should be involved in data governance eventually, right?
Right, exactly. You should definitely have the entire company involved because, again, at a previous company I worked with, started a full company, total buy-in from leadership. It was wonderful.
Wow.
And one of the big benefits we saw at the very beginning was that we got every individual department's wikis all into a single technology, into a single wiki. And it turned out client success was able to use Sales Wiki to answer questions faster, and they reduced their call time by 28% or something.
Wow.
Just immediately.
Like real numbers, real KPIs, all immediately from just trying to get rid of some data.
Yeah, and getting it all in one spot and sharing instead of having to continually ask. And that's kind of a core of data governance, is not duplicating, not having this redundancy, being able to access it for people who need it, making it a useful piece, and reaping real world benefits.
Yeah, that stewardship piece. The key with what you just said was leadership buy-in.
Yeah, that is the core.
I have to have the authority bestowed upon me. I need to be christened.
I mean, it's really hard to do a grassroots version of this, right?
Yeah, what you find when you do grassroots is the people that have the hyper-organized file shares that are all cleaned up are the volunteers.
Right.
And their stuff is like, well, yeah, they care about it. They
what about this
understand
3
it.
petabytes over here?
Yeah, you can get the library people. Those are the easy ones. But no, that leadership buy-in to where the project is coming from the top. Everybody is, you're getting on board. We're doing this. We're moving forward with this. So, this is the people we chose that are going to be running the project. When they schedule meetings with you, accept them. Show up,
right,
and cooperate. And sometimes you need a speech. Depending on the organization, you need some kind of an introduction, right, from authority to make this serious to everybody. This is a real thing.
That being said, once you have that initial buy-in, usually the moment you start getting some results, you will see the individuals going from, I guess I have to be here, to, I would like to come because we're getting something out of this.
Right.
Right. I have identified this other place that I would like to benefit from, right?
Someone's got to start pumping that handle to get the water out, and it takes a while for that water to come out.
Yeah. Someone has to prime the pump, as it would be. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me ask about, we talked about stewards and data users. What about data admins and data custodians? What are they doing in this? Are they just helping facilitate? Are they asking, like, what about this? What about this? What about this?
Yes, to some extent. So kind of when we have the business and technology sides of things, at the top of the technology side is data admins. Those are usually implementing the data governance program. Like, they're the ones probably leading this whole thing. They're implementing it and administrating it. Again, admin.
It's in the name.
And just below them are data custodians, and those are your data engineers. Those are the ones probably doing the actual work of the cleanup or doing the data definitions decided on by the group. And then on the other side, the top of that, are your data stewards. And
so
stewards
they're
are
equal.
Probably, basically they're equal across. Beyond that, I keep saying beneath, but it's not really beneath. It's just beyond the data stewards or the data users. Because you don't want to talk to every user individually.
Somebody's elected captain,
exactly.
And that's okay.
Yeah. But the data users need to be communicating with their stewards to be like, hey, like this data is really good, but it would be better if it was in this format coming to us because we can't use JavaScript standard or whatever.
Yeah, medical XML records from 1980.
Yeah.
And so
it's
defining
difficult.
Your data, passing it up, asking it, whatever. So it comes from the request from a user to a steward. The steward brings it up. It's agreed upon by the committee, usually made up the stewards and the admin. And the admin tells their custodians what to do to fix it up. Very cyclical.
So that initial involvement of identifying stewards, of identifying, that ownership and all of that.
Right.
What I found on some of my projects is they didn't give you the person that knew all the things to work with. It was the new person that had air in their schedule.
They got so much free time. It's amazing.
And it was like, okay, now you have a person that constantly has to badger somebody to get that information. And it's like, how do you communicate that this is the person we're looking for? This is the right person that will be able to be a steward of your data.
Again, that comes all the way back to probably your buy-in from leadership who says, you are in charge of this department. You're the steward.
Okay.
But that wasn't always how it went either. At a previous company, one of the stewards was someone who is just really informed, client success, their customer service department. That person was just like their best agent, not their manager, who knew everything.
Right.
And they didn't have the authority to make decisions, but they were empowered by their management to make those decisions. So sometimes you might get that new person, and if they have empowerment behind them and they're not having to badger, it's not really a concern. And you can kind of train them in on it.
So it doesn't have to be a leader. It can be anybody who has good technical or good custodial information about what that data is and why it is.
Exactly. Yeah. And some of that is just the support of their team. They could know nothing. They could be that new person who knows nothing.
Right.
But if their team is supporting them in that role, they're still going to have that information for you. Maybe not offhand, but they can get it. And as long as those communication lines are open. Yeah.
And that new person is probably not going to be prejudiced against getting rid of any data, right? I mean, there's certainly that case.
Yeah. And they don't have any of that like, well, this is mine and it's always been mine. And this is how we've always done it. That's the scariest phrase to me when starting a data governance thing. Well, this is how we've always done it. I know, and that's why we're here now.
Right. Yeah.
So you drove the truck backwards down the highway and you got it stuck up the tree. And I know that's how you've always done it, but.
Yeah. And that's there's a lot of sales that has to go into this, and you're selling people on the idea of it.
That's
so
totally
when you're
true.
talking about, the person that, you have that person that, well, I know where everything is. I have what I need. And so anything in this arena to them is going to look like extra work that I don't need to do.
And I will say, starting a data governance program is a lot of extra work in the short term. In the long term, it's going to save you so much effort. Right. But it's hard to sell that.
It's going to be easy to just say, anybody got this data? Yes. Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Well, and, control of the data, ownership of the data, and the source of truth, where I'm getting the version that the one that the owner is maintaining.
Right.
I'm not breaking away from that and cutting the cord. Like, now they don't maintain this anymore. It's going to be what it's always been.
And that's a change in your vernacular, too, because it's, hey, can I get a copy of that? Should become, hey, can I get access to that? You don't want to make a separate copy for them. You want them to be involved.
And, you get that content strategy defined, where we're going to share links to things. We're not going to share files themselves.
Yeah.
When we replace and update things, we're going to basically use the versioning built in, and we're just going to overwrite the old one with the new one, or we're going to update it in place. And that way the link never has to change. Your bookmark always works, and you're always getting the latest version.
Yeah. IT's been doing it for years with repos. You have your Git management, and we've always had that. And more content and documentation pieces are available because SharePoint, Google Drive, OneDrive, all of those are set up to share links.
Right. And sometimes easily.
Sometimes. Yeah.
The advances with like group editing, where that real-time collaboration have made a lot of inroads.
Yeah.
Where why don't we just work on it here instead of passing it around? Okay, who's got the latest copy? And then, you find that there's people that just won't work that new way. They still work the old way. And you feel the drain, when that's happening, you're used to the new way and the old way is happening. You look at it and you're just shaking your head going, this is just silly. Yeah. So there's been, people that have gone like whole hog into this new world, sometimes they do it to a point where you're not allowed to attach files anymore. You can only do links. If I see a file attachment, you're in trouble. Just those governance things. And, it's like not real trouble, but, we're going to mention it. For an intranet, it's got to be a little bit more rigid, a little bit more structured. It's got to be, intuitive, where you can find everything. And that's where naming conventions are really important. Just looking at a list of documents, having, if it's based on a date, having the date first. Like when I name all these podcasts, it starts with the date 05172024.
And it doesn't have to be the perfect naming convention, but a naming convention at all already starts to tell people exactly what they're looking at, and it makes it that much easier to get the data you need.
Yeah. And, you work with people on that to figure out what's going to work for them. What have they used in the past? Do they have any current conventions? And then you auditing. I will look through the documents that we have out there just to see if we're still following that. We had a big renaming push. We had a big cleanup push. All those kind of things. We don't want dead content to show up in search. All that stuff, just a naming convention will improve search.
It will.
Just naming a document the same as the title of it when you open it is really helpful.
Yeah.
Those kind of things. So there's a usability piece there as well when you're kind of defining your new data structures. So how do you you're coming at this a few ways. We got the file problem and we got the database problem.
Right.
How would you start if you're going to go greenfield and build a new application, new data, knew everything. When you do that database design, are you thinking long term? Are you thinking about data waste? Are you thinking in that direction?
Absolutely. Especially so greenfield, new application, new data governance, new everything. That's where your solutions architects and your data architects and your UI UX designers, everything. Before someone types a line of code, you should have a pretty solid idea of where things are going to be kept, what kind of things are going to be kept, how they're going to be named. If I see one more database with a number in it, but these things, they're really important to do and to have good naming conventions. The other part of that usability, the naming conventions, etc., is that don't use shorthand that could mean multiple things.
TRC.
Right. Well, and I used to work in e-commerce, and one of the things, like a bunch of these tables had CC underscore in front of them, which in the long run I learned was credit card.
Hopefully.
But at first I was like, what is CC? What is this? What am I even looking at?
Cash and carry.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, we had 2,700 databases. Like, when you've got that much going on, you can't question what this data is every time.
You can't be short with your descriptions, and modern technology doesn't limit you. So don't limit yourself, right? Like, don't try to be super creative. Boy, this is the best. This is the best variable name ever. It's called 7. I thought about it. It's the 7th variable. How cool is that? Nobody will ever forget it. Like, really? Okay.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. I consider data governance kind of like the style guide.
So greenfield project, you start right away. Get that in. Get it baked in early.
Yeah. Then
and you're writing the data dictionary. That's
exactly
at that point.
When I was doing primarily data architecture pieces, I tried to have at least a fairly solid ERD, entity relationship diagram, available to the dev team before they started on a process, so they knew where that data was going to go and what it looked like.
Did you paste it on a giant wall covering multiple sides of a conference room? And
no, I had a Figma board for it, actually, because the UI UX team decided to use Figma. So I just started including it in with that. And they started doing endpoint dictionaries, for the API as well, and having all of that before the developers started on it.
That's so weird.
Yeah.
What does that give you, Peter, as a jump start when you start developing, when you write the first line of code?
It gives me everything. I know what I've got, what my objects have to look like. They've got to match up. They might as well match up, because I'm not going to get creative. Why would I get creative? Somebody's already done the thinking. So I don't have to get creative with how my objects look, or I know what's going to be stored. I know what's going to be displayed. And
so it takes all that guesswork out of the way.
Guesswork.
It takes all those pauses of all those questions you have to ask point in time.
It even saves your QA time. They can look at that and go, this doesn't look the same.
Right.
As soon as it hits QA, there's no question about what that should look like.
And then you can kind of see who's going off on their own and writing, and I don't know if this is good or bad, but var in front of everything, and txt and like int and underscore versus like this guy's using dashes, this underscores, spaces.
But yeah,
that's all been provided with me. I just copy and paste out of Figma. I don't have to even think.
That's
what
the
were you going to say, James?
Tool. Sorry.
I was going to. I thought you meant the Figma renamed. I was like, here I am using old names for the technology.
No.
But yeah, it's one of those things. If you get your design team just a little out ahead, and they can start asking things. So, data architect says, this should be stored at, this money value should actually be stored as an integer so we don't get rounding errors.
Right.
And the dev team looks at that and says, okay, cool. So in our API endpoint, we either need to acknowledge that it's coming back as an integer or change it to a float or a decimal or money or whatever your data type available in your language is. And knowing that, the UI UX designers can put it in that it should be in this format, the same for dates. You get to see all that ahead of time, and just along the whole pathway, exactly the expectation.
Yeah.
And that speeds up your development process so much.
Well, it's that whole development life cycle, right?
Yeah.
If you do the thinking at the front, you don't have to do it in the middle. And you have to do less thinking at the front than you would in the middle, because you're trying to capture more things. So by providing that, it's like, here's my map, here's everything I need to do to make this.
And now that documentation at the end that goes to client success to help with users, end users.
Captures
is already
knowledge.
There.
Perfect.
So how do you go in later on and
you mean a brownfield development? Oh wait, that's probably not the word.
Scorched earth development.
So
drain
how do you,
field.
How do you come back at that?
How do you reverse engineer that when
you just use
didn't
AI,
do those
right?
things?
AI does everything.
Hold on, let me use AI. Yeah, got it.
That's not a completely awful thing. There's a lot of the systems where you can draw ERDs, database things. This is what I know the best. You can attach it to a database and it will pull the existing schema. So you can pull that out and have your data definition right there. You fill it out with some notes, comments about what's usable.
And lots of comments.
Lots and lots of comments. And make these notations, or you go into your application structure and you write it out. But the thing is, you start with a snapshot of what exists now. And I think this is a theme we've hit like 9 or 10 times today already.
We'll do it as many times as we need to.
Yeah. Find out what you have now, because you can't move ahead until you know where you're standing.
Right. And a good look through all of that existing data is probably going to provide you numerous overlaps and that kind of thing where it's obvious as somebody taking a look with fresh eyes says,
right.
Oh, look, here's 2 databases that are almost identical. I wonder how that happened.
Right.
And can we make it not?
Yeah, I've done a look through a database and found out they had tables where they were just storing the names of the days of the week.
Right.
That's it.
You can't generate that kind of information on the fly. Nobody knows those 7 words. You have to store those in a database.
Were they the standard ones, or did they have nicknames? Like
it was literally just they had a primary key. They were in the standard order you'd expect, with Monday being 1 and Sunday being 7. And maybe that's not standard. Maybe they put it in there because they decided that was the standard.
Or maybe Sunday is 0.
I would have Sunday being 1, but that's
Saturday
that's
6.
Me.
Yeah.
Well, it is a weekend. ANSI standard is Sunday at 7, but
what is so what would have why is that a bad idea?
Storing those days, kind of things?
Like, so you can put them in a lookup or something like that.
Yeah.
What's the alternative?
So you can do that, but generally speaking, if you're needing the names of the days of the week, you don't need it in the database. You need it at the application level.
Right.
Right.
And something
Why
like
make
that
a
is
call to get that data.
And if you're going to go there, like, okay, so that was a standard SQL database, tabular data, but did it need to be there? Could it have been like a JSON document that we could read, which is a much smaller, less overhead storage version?
Big giant string stored in all of your, account info data or whatever, your config data, like config days of the week. Here they are. Bam.
Right.
Now I look once and I look local.
And those are the things beyond, that's advanced data governance does it need to be stored in this technology?
Right.
So I'm a leader in the business, and I have a lot of, I'm the corporate sponsor of this project, and it's really, a big chunk of it is to help us make decisions, decisions with data. And so does it often happen that there's involvement and requests for dashboards, single panes of glass, or put all this extra stuff in here because we want to see it this way or that way? And is there some bloat that can happen when they just want everything in their data?
Yeah. And that absolutely happens a lot. I just trying to think of a good example so I can talk more directly to it. But I've definitely seen it where they just keep requesting these one-off reports, and the data team's building these, and they have a bunch of things in it that don't necessarily need to exist, but they're pulling it out of this system, so they need to put it in that system so they can get it. But this is where you get into longer-term planning of, let's throw it in a data lake. Let's put it in a data warehouse where we can combine multiple data sources, and we don't need to duplicate.
Let's have everybody read it from the lake rather than... Right. This system stores it, but then needs to be called 12 different ways by different systems.
Yeah, you can minimize. Centralizing your data minimizes your bloat. Crazy, I know, but it's true. But then, your business intelligence team, whoever's doing that, will have something through Power BI that they can attach to that lake. And then we're not trying to include this and include that and include that. We can do those one-off reports out of some technology along those lines. That's a little bit more flexible. I know Azure has Synapse, which works pretty well with that, and Synapse can connect to Power BI as well. They can do a lot of things along those.
Nice.
Yeah. That's one of the things is having your data across a number of systems creates additional overhead when you're having to integrate. So, I pull data from Salesforce and I pull data from SharePoint. And sometimes I do it in the same workflow where I have to update things or pull things in. And if it was all in one place, like it would just be, moving stuff around, working with it directly. And I think that's fine for smaller projects and things like that, but does it scale well? This was an hour build I had to do once in 5 years. And, but if this was something that was much larger and had to be maintained and updated.
Right. Well, and you mentioned dashboards, and those are more and more and more popular. And they're so useful. Like, I wasn't knocking on them at all. I think they're wonderful. If every time you load the screen on that dashboard, it has to query SharePoint, Salesforce, and pull those together and do the data manipulation to create the report, that's a huge technical overhead every time somebody loads that screen. But if it existed in a data lake or warehouse specifically for that, and it was pulled once a day and you just knew it was 24 hours behind or whatever, it pulled every hour, then it's only querying where you've already done your data transformations and they're already available, and it just queries one place, and that can be a little bit more live without these random connections. And that's part of doing the planning ahead.
And you might decide that 24 hours is enough. You might decide that 5 minutes is the right number, but at least you can decide, and not every time Kyle hits refresh on the page, we go out to 3 different servers, and somehow Friday afternoon, right when X is happening, Kyle just keeps hitting the refresh button and picking up data.
All of leadership sits down in a meeting and every one of them opens the dashboard at the same time. We hit the Salesforce API and overrun the hit rate, and it just
hit your limits on that.
Yeah, and it just shuts us off and nothing loads.
Sometimes you get throttled, like you do too much too quickly, hitting against Office 365, and then you can watch it slow right down on you.
On your web server platform, right?
Yeah,
exactly. And that's planning ahead for those things and making it, a read-only replica to pull your reports from, even if you're using a live transactional database.
That makes so much more sense. Have that third-party ask and read outside of, that single space.
Yeah, and those are those things: the usability, the planning ahead, the just integration in general.
Everything. Yeah.
And then going in later, having to, help solve the problems that not doing it up front. And, I don't think there should be any shame or, it's just you get to where you get to in your business. And at every day from day one, things were a good idea at that time.
Right.
Yeah.
I've had a great idea at the beginning of a project that was a good idea at the time, and by the end it changed because it no longer was. So it's, I think it's important not to get bent out of shape, not to, play the blame game. It's like, okay, we know we have this problem and we know we need to fix it, and we know we need somebody that's knows how to do that, somebody to come in and go, the first thing you need is sort of a review.
Absolutely.
And it's like, this is what we're looking at. This is where our problems are. And so then you pick the high value targets and, where to begin.
Well, and it should be a cyclical, ever evolving system. You do something, you get feedback, you do something else, you get feedback, you alter it just a little bit, and it should just keep ever evolving. So all these documents you create for data governance, they should be a living document. They should, get feedback from the users, the custodians, the stewards, and make sure that this is still working for everyone.
And is that sort of like product owner territory, or like who's the, your data, if you're taking a product approach to an application or internal service, something like that, who's the steward? Like, who plays that role?
Ooh. And I think it's going to depend on the organization and how their product owner works with whoever. Product owners have a big job already. I don't know that I would try to make them the steward of that.
Right.
Probably some kind of leadership in the application team would be more appropriate for that, because they could still communicate with the product owner. But I don't think the product owner should be in charge of how things are kept and stored in the background kind of thing.
But just maybe know that stuff should be happening.
Yeah.
We should have a data stored as part of the, when we do our role definitions or whatever that is, we need people to be wearing these hats. And we need this to happen at a regular cadence, and we need to do it in an intentional way, following some sort of guide. Your data, your data version of a, what'd you call it? Like the design style guide
that you produce.
Yeah. Like a style guide,
a data style guide with a data.
And you
never
stop, right? You don't stop. It's not like on January 1st we will have completed all of our.
Yeah. No, that's not. You can set roadmaps, et cetera, for what you want to accomplish, but it shouldn't ever be done.
Right.
It should become less because you're not incorporating all this brand new data. But
when I started a data governance program, we met weekly at first. We went to monthly, and I think when we got into the run of it, it was quarterly, but it didn't really require the quarterly meetings because we were using, in this case, a Slack room to constantly talk to each other. People would be like, just who owns this? Can I get access?
Good communication. You didn't have to find out who owns this because the owner had already been identified through your weekly meetings, right?
Right.
So they know who owns it. They know they are the person. They can tell you how to get access.
One of the things with this is, beginning something like this is going to be a pain.
Right.
But I don't want people to look at that as like a long-term thing. I like to call them growing pains because it's pain now, but once you're there, it will stop. It'll become part of your everyday workflow.
I mean, maintaining your System 34 was probably a pain, but replacing it was probably a pain, but maintaining it now 40, 50 years later is probably impossible. So,
well, and you look at, the future and tools that are coming along like AI, and maybe it needs to do machine learning and on your data and things like that. Well, if your data is not good, then
I could talk for an hour on data sanitation.
Okay.
Okay.
Here's the stopwatch.
Yep, sold.
Genuinely cleaning up the quality of your data and making sure it's available is going to be one of the biggest keys to the machine learning AI area, because AI, we call it artificial intelligence, but it's not intelligent.
Right.
Right now, it's algorithmic inferences is what AI stands for, and it only knows what you tell it. So if you give it bad information or unclear information or poorly formatted information,
right,
it's useless.
It will give you an answer,
yeah,
but not necessarily the right answer.
Forever, one of my favorite things is a company fed all of their hiring information to an AI and said, tell us what we should be looking for in the best candidates.
Yeah.
And this company was in San Diego, and it said, you should hire people from San Diego. Those seem to be the best for you.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Because
San Diego addresses in there.
Yeah, because they didn't take that out, because that's pointless information. I think that's number 4 thing was you should hire people named Josh.
I know a lot of Joshes. They're pretty good.
Yeah. But I can't argue against that.
But hard to base your hiring
weeded
approach.
Those out. Yeah.
You don't want 17 Joshes at your organization either,
and that doesn't really feel like an indicator of success to me.
Josh H7 is. I'm looking to talk to him today.
All right. Well, I think
Josh.
That's our time for today. Any parting thoughts? Any more nuggets of wisdom?
It's never too late to start.
Yeah, it's never too late to start. And it's a collaborative, evolving process.
And James Kirwin can help. He's the sanitation. He is the data sanitation professional.
That seems weird. I'm not sure.
Data custodian professional.
Yeah, data custodian. Super steward. Yeah.
I have a lot of background in this.
Excellent. Well, thanks for joining us again, James. And as always, thanks for being here, Peter. Yep. And I think with that, we'll shut her down and say goodbye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Goodbye.
Solution Design Group is a digital product consultancy in Minneapolis. Check us out on the web at solutiondesign.com or look for us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram at Solution Design Group.